Hello. So let's carry on here, and this is going to be a sort of in-between video, just to try and wrap up the extra layers we've made for the portal. By in-between, I mean we're just going to do some housekeeping. I've rendered out the additional sci-fi layers, and then we'll set up some lights. So we'll get these few tasks out the way and then jump onto our secondary effects after that. So just to remind you, we've done this inner layer, and then we have this pattern on the surface. And just to add, what I did here is I resampled it and then ended up raying it back onto the actual shield. So if you look, after the remesh and everything, it was slightly inside, so I just decided to push that out perfectly, just in case when we look at it over here, I didn't want a layer to feel like it was slightly inside the particles. And then all I did was I made a new geo for each one of those and duplicated the wrangle that's setting our p-scale and multiplying our velocity down. And then all I did was apply the exact same shader. So all of these particle layers are using the same particle shader, which, if I go as a reminder, is just an emissive one. So I've got color and alpha, and those are the attributes coming from the point cloud, multiplying the color by the alpha, and that is our base color and emission color here. And then the alpha is going into opacity. So that's our emission there, set to 1, and I've switched off emission illuminates objects just because that's an extra on the renderer that we don't need, because I plan on making a light. So we're going to make a light now after we've taken a look at these layers in comp. And here you can see I've just duplicated some more mantras for each one of those sci-fi layers there. So all I'm doing is forcing the object with the pattern, same mattes, the environment and the character are a matte, and that's it. So same for both of these. And if I jump over to Fusion, here's the two new layers. So it's a little bit samply. Either it needs much more samples or there's not enough points, because I did end up then going and scattering points onto these. But it looks pretty cool, and the inner one looks really cool. I'm very happy with this one. So let's do a quick addition here to our comp and see how we can add these in. So let's start with our inner. So I'm going to put this right in the back, so behind this one. So we'll use that one as the background layer. We'll merge our inner particle sim on top. So you can see that's very subtle. So what I want is, I did want it to be kind of flat, but looking at this now, I think our best chance is to crank up the highlights. So I don't want that. But maybe if we just take the brightest parts, boost them up, so in this case it is actually going more contrasty, but I feel like that's a good way to pick these out of the particle layer. So maybe boost it slightly overall. Yeah, I like that. That still feels like you can see the particles, but you get these kind of patterns inside, which feels pretty good. Okay, let's see how that looks with everything else on top. Yeah, you can still see those nicely. Especially on this side where you're looking at the kind of side of the sphere here, you can see all these patterns moving in. And then if we take our surface, try and find somewhere to add this, maybe underneath here. So again, I just need to balance these so we can just see it. Shouldn't be the main element. So here some of these layers are using post multiply on the alpha, and so that's useful for making sure that it's basically a pre-mult in Nuke, so the alpha usually looks slightly thinner, especially with emissive renders, so you can multiply that by the alpha, but in this case I'm trying to get a little bit more than what's visible in the render there, so I'm going to switch that off. Let's do our usual color tweaks here. And let me try to switch that back on. I actually prefer it on. It's just a little bit more subtle, but you can still see it. Yeah, so you can see that nicely there on the background noise. And I can still see the connected JSON layer inside there as well. I'm pretty happy with that. That's a whole nother level of complexity on top of what we had before. But similar to my other particle layer, I'm going to have to key down all of this effect that's left over, sort of hanging around the character at this point. It just lasts for too long. I want everything to pop off at the same time as these particles fly out. And let me take this now and add a displacement similar to what we did with the portal. And I'm going to use some part of this comp over here, like something that's been completely untreated. Let's try that one, and I'm going to put down a brightness and contrast here and just clip the whites. Make sure our center is in the middle. So this is going to help again to blend the layers together, add something slightly more effectsy to it, so it's a bit less physical feeling. And then also because we're using point rendering here, it should help just soften up that point cloud. So it's pretty subtle, and we'll put a big one on the background as well. But I think it does kind of help. I like it. Right, so let's set up a quick lighting. So all we need to do is take one of our particle layers and generate some geometry out of that to make a geolight. So I'm going to use the main points here. So we've got those, and I am going to put down a p-scale just separate from the rendering p-scale here, just in case generating the VDB really slows down. VDB from particles. Pretty sure we did the exact same thing for the shield. So I'm just trying to find some values here to get a good mesh. Doesn't need to be particularly detailed. And I also want the VDB to, why can't I get this? To just basically be surrounding the highlights. So if we look at this color, I've got these more dull yellows, and then I've got the bright spots. So try and get the VDB just to cover the bright spots. So to do that, I'll just base the p-scale on green. I'm just going to throw in a multiplier here. So here we smooth this, and then we convert. Back to polygons. So now it's just a case of scaling these points down until I get my nice, pretty low res, but nicely filling in the hotspots geometry there. Something like that. Might be too much, but let's go with that and do some test renders. So I'll just take that there and I'll use the geometry light. Which is doing something. I'm not sure what. I'll just make my own. So this can be our shield light. So I'm just going to quickly set this up and then we'll do a test render. So we set that to geometry. I'll point that to shield particles, out shield light. And then I'll do a quick active radius here. Let's go with 5. And one thing I want to do before we render is actually transfer the color back from our particles back onto this mesh so that we get the subtle variances of yellow there. So there's our geometry now, and it's got the difference in color, and that'll go straight through the light color as well. And then if I come over here, I can just duplicate our environment and character portal lights. So we'll just do environment shield light and shield light for the character. And am I happy with this? So we do need debris in the scene from our portal. We've got the character cache as a phantom, so at least the we should get shadows. And then here we just force the shield light. So let's see how that looks. Well, that's a pretty good first test. Yeah, that's definitely doing the trick. So what I can do here is let's just exaggerate. When it's close to the source of the light, we'll have this going a bit more. And then quickly falling off. And depending how you're setting this up, obviously if you're rendering everything in one pass, you could spend a long time with the render view open here just to get good values for the lights. Otherwise, in this case, because I'm rendering a completely separate lighting pass, I'll have a lot of control in comp. So I just need to make sure I have enough information. And you see all these small points of noise. That's the secondary bounces. If I switch off, so if I come here to the light to contributions and I add indirect lighting and I switch it off, then those are gone. So at this point there's no need for me to go extreme with making sure I get all the subtleties of secondary bounces of the indirect light. I just need a good convincing emission point from the shield here. So that looks good. I'll just quickly check the character pass as well. If I can find it. Effects, environment, shield light character. Very well named. So pretty happy with the extra layers here. I think this is looking nice, and once this is actually affecting the environment and the character in terms of the lighting, I think it's a pretty strong effect. So I'll go ahead and render out those lighting passes, but before we move on to recomping this, I think we'll just spend the next few videos tackling a bunch of the extra elements. So if you go back and look at the reference we were looking at from X-Men, that character's shield was actually invisible, but there was a ton of smoke and sparks and fire all interacting with the outside, which I think added something really nice. So we might not go as extreme, but we want to add something, a reaction of the actual projectile breaking on the surface of the shield. And there's the character, so that's working fine as well. So I'm safe to render those out. And I'll see you in the next video where we'll do the secondary effects. I'll see you then. Hello, welcome back. Right, let's get stuck in here and add in our secondary elements. So similar to the portal, we went ahead and we added rigid body debris and some dust volumetrics and some particles. And I feel like it's really important to accompany any of the magical effects with secondary environmental elements to make it feel like the magic's physically there in the scene. And even if you're working on just a magical effect for your showreel, maybe consider adding in some environmental elements like around that effect. It's going to make it 100 times better. So let's see what we want here. Let's start with some sparks. So if we come to our shield, now anything we do add here as a secondary element we should base off of the moving shield. We don't want sparks and smoke to be animated with this movement, so I'm not going to use the locked off one here. I'll use the actual moving shield. And what I need is our impact points, our ground impact points, and our impact points from the shield. So let me double check these. So here we have the points, if you can see, hitting the environment, and then we have the points hitting the shield. So we can just use those directly, and I've put in a group here for ground hits. So that might be useful, might not, but at least we know later on that we can delete out, like say, the shield from the ground if we need to change any of the effects that we add onto that. So let's take this first of all, and I guess pop replicate. What I need to do is or point replicate, I need to make a source for sparks, and I think if we do a point replicate here, we can turn this into a bunch of points and probably use the same source for the smoke. So for now I want to bulk up these points by adding, in this case there's 100 times more, and we definitely want to keep our input points and copy our source attributes. So we get the normals and everything we want there. There's no velocity at this point. So let's start with something like that. And then there's a handy little feature here on the point replicate, this radial velocity. So let's try and set that quickly. I'll put down a point SOP. And this normal is pointing back towards the camera, and I want the velocity of the particles to be going away from the camera. So we just need to invert our normal here. So let's set a velocity, and we'll use at n times -1. Visualize our velocity. So that's the direction we want both the smoke and the sparks to move in. And then if I change this radial velocity here, the point replicate's pretty much doing the job for me of making that a spread. So we just need that to spread slightly, and then I'm going to put down an attribute noise and just multiply some of those velocities so we get very random velocities coming out of those sparks. So it'd be a 1D noise, and we multiply. So something like that, we get a nice variation there in speed. And then we have that happening on the ground as well. So that's a pretty decent source. I'm going to immediately drop down a pop net here. And let's just see what this gives us. And obviously I need to also include, in this case we only need a ground plane, so I might just try and steal that from somewhere else. I'm pretty sure I have a DOP with a ground plane in somewhere. There's our ground plane there. Let's just see if that works. I'm not seeing it. Ah, okay, yeah, because this is importing it from the DOP that it's from, which is the portal dust. Should still be fine. But in that case we actually need to run that sim, so I'm just going to make my own. Let's just make sure our DOP is set to the correct DOP here. That's fine, and then I'll just, oops. A bit messy, but we don't need it for much. I just need something in here. There we go. And if I have a look here, starting at frame 100, For some reason I still don't see the ground plane. I'm not sure why. Let me start by just sourcing some points here in this sim, and I'll see if I can figure out the ground plane thing later. So we want points, and I'm going to set a constant birth rate, that's fine. And we have inheriting velocity, so it should pretty much be it. So it's doing something. And we have a long life. If I disable that ground plane, something super weird going on here. Looking at all this and all, I'm not seeing anything broken. And yet these particles are only existing for a few frames. So I must be doing something wrong. Ah, okay, so that's just the source. And why is that? Maybe our velocity is too high, so the points are actually just disappearing. Doesn't seem to be. Let's try and increase our velocity. Okay, I think I know what's going on. So there's an automatic point offset when you have a source with velocities on it. So in the birth section here, I have a jitter birth time set to positive, so I can switch that to none, and the first frame should have just the source. And then it moves. So it depends if you're trying to remove some substepping from the source, or you just want the first frame to have moving points, but I guess that's what we were looking at before. Something I don't understand though is why the particles aren't existing for very long. And I have a feeling that's got something to do with this invisible ground plane. It definitely exists. Oh, and now it appears. Maybe a bug? I don't know. Let's just keep moving here. So I'm still not getting much of a life. Let's try some more. Oh, I think I've got it. There's probably, yeah, I've got an age attribute on the source. So if I look at my points from that I'm using as a source, I already have an age and a life attribute on there, so I need to clear this up. So and this is always a case when you move from one sim and you try and use that sim in another sim, just make sure you clear every attribute and just keep what you really need. In this case, I only really need velocity. Oh, there you go. So that's Awesome. Okay. So now maybe we can get something done. So let's go. I'll keep a high velocity and I'll set this to something more useful, and I'm going to put down a gravity as well. I'm getting some weird sections here where it looks like the particles are shooting in the wrong direction. So all the ones that are hitting the ground are moving right, and then I get a random one which goes the other way. So let's see if I can narrow down what's causing that. These all look fine to me. Through the pop replicate, through the attribute noise. Aha! So here I need the remap to be only to 0 because I'm multiplying the velocity by a noise and my minimum value is a negative value. So I just need that to go from 0 and in this case 2. And let's take another look. There we go. So something I want is for the points not to shoot out and create this shape which carries on moving. So some sparks should be so slow that they at least connect the furthest point to the actual source. So it might be a case of adjusting how this velocity is working. So let's take a look at just one of these and make sure we've got some very slow velocities. So a higher frequency noise there. Let's just try higher frequency for now. That's better. So if you look at this small one here, the difference in velocities are so drastic that some of them are so slow they get left behind. Okay, it's still pretty extreme. I'm going to reduce the age a bit, say 0.5, reduce the velocity a little bit, and then let's add in a collision object, and we'll just point to our sphere or our shield here. And now we just need to find it. Effect shield. There we go. And we use deforming because that's the moving one. And let's just merge this in. I don't see it. There we go. Ah, because it's only appearing here. There we go, so now the particles are bouncing off that shield. So pretty crazy. All we need to do is adjust some of these physical values here. And you can spend ages tweaking the values of this sim, but at the end of the day, we just want something bright and flashy for a few frames. So we can control a lot of that after we have the actual particle simulation. So for example, if I move straight from this point down to actually generating what the sparks look like, then we can come back and tweak the sim based on how it looks rather than just looking at points. So for starters, if I take just the particles here and we set a time blend and a trail. I don't think I need the time blend unless I write it out, but it depends how many substeps I've got as well. So I'll just put down a time blend, which should try and interpolate in between frames, and then a trail. And there's a million ways you can make sparks. You could be copying lines, you could just be rendering points with motion blur, or you can use a trail, which if the points arcing quite a lot should give you a good arc. So something to define the length of the spark, and then we just add a polygon between them based on ID. So that's some pretty fireworks going on. And I can right now also, I'm going to make an attribute based on the length of each one of those lines. So we'll probably use this in a few places. $PT divided by $NPT. Put down a color, and let's just give a little fall off for each one of these sparks. So we'll ramp from the mask attribute. So we have a bright leading edge and then it tails off. So I mean, it's quite a lot and it looks pretty extreme, but like I said, we can finish the rest of the setup and then adjust how many points or how wide the point replicate here is, for example. So I can make that smaller now. So a bunch of stuff we can do after this, after we've seen the final look. And here's another thing I like to do with sparks, is actually just put down something that's the end of the spark. So if you look at a reference of sparks, you'll see, let's see if I can bring something up. So there's going to be a lot of cartoonish ones. Here's some, but it doesn't really have what I'm looking for. That's more embers. There's those curves I was talking about. a little bit like this, but this is obviously specifically a sparkler. But you'll often see, especially in slow-mo videos and sparks interacting with something, you get a little tip where the front of the spark is trying to break off or explode into smaller pieces, and that gives you a little high detail area. And it's not like you want it to look like that, but if you just add something to the end of that line, once you render it with motion blur, it actually does make quite a big difference. So to do that, I'll orient a line here on Z. I'll do a mask on that as well. And then if we add a point at the origin, I'll do a pop replicate, point replicate. And we don't need so many. And let's see, I can't see anything. Add a point, point replicate. So we just want a random collection of points there, and I'll copy these lines. And then I can use whichever method I want to kind of mess up this orientation. I don't have a velocity here, so I can put in a random here. Just as an example for now. So you see there's just a random velocity there, and I can randomly scale these as well. And for each one of these points, I can randomize the orientation of this whole setup here as well. So let's say I have our particles, then I just use a copy. Copy these on. Try to figure out what I'm looking at here. So I do have these the wrong way around. So I'll just adjust that here. And then also put in a random scale based on ID. Just small. And I'm also going to throw in a random scale. So something just as simple as that can make a big difference once you see it rendered. So once it's got motion blur, you've added just an extra little bit of detail, and when it's blurred it adds an extra dimension to those sparks. So it can be pretty effective. So I'll just do something like that. And also, so you see I've randomized some orientation on the first copy, and then I'm randomizing some scale and rotation now again. Let's choose what's a good one. Yeah, on Z. And we should get a lot of variation that way. And that's it. And then obviously we want to multiply those colors down by the actual age. So we've got to make sure we transfer our point attributes here. And then we can make a lot of changes. So we can say color is multiplied. Again, we can use a ramp. Which is age divided by life. So they'll go nice and dark before they actually die. And that seems to be working for the extra element I copied, but not the main one. Ah, I need to merge this. So that is just our detail element, and here is our main spark. There we go. And same thing, we can base our alpha. And what else? P-scale. Oops. And then another thing we can do, I'm going to use a separate wrangle here, is just randomize the color. So we'll be using the color in the shader. So we'll just use another fit01, randomize by ID. Between 0.25 and 2. So each one of them can look slightly different. So some are brighter than others. And all of these small tweaks make a huge difference when it's rendered with motion blur. So you can actually start out with something that feels like way too many points. And once you see it, because you have so much variation in scale and in intensity, it kind of works. So I think we can definitely, there's room to play with the size of the source and the randomness of this velocity that shoots the points out. There's a ton of stuff we can change there. What it does when it interacts with the shield. Like, I think it's all living for too long. And it can probably have a random variance as well. So at the moment for me this is looking a bit like fireworks, and it looks like a bit too many and the velocities are a bit too crazy. But I think you get the general idea. And all of these values can be toned down now that we have an actual testable network here where we can look at the end result and then come back and tweak some of these values. So I'll do one more tweak here, and if I'm not happy with it, I'll keep tweaking it on my own. But I won't be changing anything pretty much except for these velocity settings and this noise here. Oh, that's quite a big difference. So in this case, you can see the detail layer, because it's not being scaled by the velocity of the points from the original sim, that ends up being all you see. So we could also multiply this by this velocity. Multiplied by the length of Vx, Vy, and Vz. So here, at least if the point's moving slow, then the detail layer is moving much smaller as well. So I'm just trying to figure out what these are. I think that's points bouncing off. That's looking a bit better, I think. It's really just a matter of looking at this and keep playing it, keep messing with settings until you feel like you're convinced it's working. And obviously nothing set in stone. We can keep moving forward, shade it, render it, and then if we don't like the sparks later on, we can always come back and tweak. So I'll end this one here. I think it's been quite a long one, and then we'll come back in the next video and add some smoke. So I'll see you then. Hi. So I've done just a few tweaks to the spark setup, and just to show you what I ended up with. It's pretty much the same. I just reduced the amount of points. I think in the pop network I reduced the constant birth rate to something like 1,000. Yeah, 1,000 there, and a bit more variance in the life. That's pretty much it. So pretty basic, nothing too fancy, and we'll render this out and see if it looks good enough in the comp. So let's quickly set up something for the smoke as well. And as I was saying before, we can try and use the same source. So here I have our source points, then we have a point replicate. We're cleaning up our geometry here, and we're adding a noise to the velocity. So we'll take that, and this can be our smoke source. But the one thing is, I need to now use that group we made. So I made a group just for the ground impact points before merging them in with the shield impact points so that we could delete them out later. And here I need to remove those So we just want to keep the shield ones. I want to add smoke to the shield but not have any smoke on the ground impacts. So delete ground hits is not working. So let me just check my group in here. So 2-point groups, ground hits. I think I'm removing the points from the original set of impacts and not after the point replicate. So what I need to do is I need to transfer that group ground hits to the replicated points as well. So I'll put down a group transfer here. So when you replicate, you can inherit the attributes from the original point, but it doesn't apply any groups into that whole bucket of points. So just to confirm that that's what's happening, you can see in here the original point is being removed, but I want all those points to be removed, so I need to transfer that group to the replicated points. So let's switch all this off and just say point groups, ground hits. And I'm not sure how this distance threshold works, but I guess if we look at the scale of this replicate, so it should be within 0.1. Still not working. Overwrite. So that worked. So let's just see if we definitely still have points on the shield. Yeah. So we'll use that for now, and what I'm going to do is actually copy over my DOP for this volume here. So we already have something that works there. I'll just use that as a base and we can tweak it from this point here. So we have our point cloud as our source. We have a noise on velocity, which I've already got, so I'm going to just add some noise to P. Just messing around with some settings here to see if I can get a little bit of breakup. So just break it up a little bit, double check our velocities. That looks fine to me. And then we have our pyro source here, which should now be set to our new .NET. And we have velocity, density, temperature, and fuel we don't need. And then we're rasterizing those. So let me just do a quick check. So it seems to be mostly working. Let's just see if we can get a strong direction of that source. So I want quite an extreme reaction when those projectiles hit the shield, and I'll probably even end up putting in a transform of the source, and this is how I do my fake wind setup. So let me just double check our settings here. So there's definitely some volume there. It's just a bit low res, I think. And then obviously, because we want a very high velocity in the sim, you need to kind of go higher on the substeps as well. So you can see I'm getting quite a lot of break up there. So basically now I'm just trying to find at least a decent starting point for this, because I've just duplicated this setup from another volume, the sim that we did before. So I just want a good thick source, and then we do have this noise as well. That's the position noise, that's fine. And then our velocity is working fine. We've got density. So I think what I'll probably need to do is add another turbulence to break this up a little bit, and maybe increase the let's have a look at these shape settings here. The disturbance can go pretty high on that. It's a fast moving effect, so the volume we're just going to see appear and disappear quite quickly, so we can go pretty crazy on these turbulences. And if we take a look at this one, just let this cook here. So I'm going to reduce the scale of that. We go very high swirl size, maybe just enough scale to have some small effect, and then I'm going to make a smaller one here. And this one I will go smaller and stronger. Let's use density. So that's using density as a control field. So where it's denser, it should be stronger. So I want that moment that the impact happens, it can be very turbulent. And let's take off of my bigger one, I'll take off a control field. So that's just a general movement. And as before, I'm going pretty high with my values there, just so that I can see that they're doing something, and then I can tweak them down. So those are pretty crazy. So we're getting some decent break up there. We don't have too many smooth plumes, which is good. Looks like the turbulences are possibly a little bit too strong still. And then let me try this fake wind. So, oh, and we need to get a collision in there as well. So let me actually grab the shield and merge it in here just for visualizing. So the velocity of the source is definitely doing the job, but I really want this smoke to be flying over. So let's just first set up a collision object. So we'll take the shield and what do we need to do? I think let's add our fake wind here. So I'll put in a transform. And all I need is for the collision object and the volume source to be moving constantly in one direction. So in this case, I want the smoke to end up moving in this direction, so on negative Z. So I need my source and my collision to move constantly on positive Z. So let's put $F times 0.2. Might be too fast. Let's keep it like that for now, and then do a reference copy. I'll put that in my source. Make sure this is pointing to transform 2. So now our source moves on positive Z and our collision object moves on positive Z as well. Let's actually put down a trail here and recompute velocity for the collision. And jump back in here. Okay, there we go. So now if I use deforming, we should get a moving collision object. And the only problem now is I'm not seeing any smoke. So it's probably because it's falling without my resize field. So the gas resize here. So I'm going to track, here we go. So I'll set that to track transform 2 as well. And so at this point, because everything in the DOP is actually just constantly moving on positive Z, it becomes sort of difficult to judge whether or not the sim's working once you're inside the DOP. So I usually come outside the DOP, do a counter transformation, and then just pin the viewport there. So let me just reduce the resolution here a bit more. And then over here, put down a reference copy and invert. So delete channels. So now everything will be moving back to where it's supposed to be, but the smoke will be flying much faster in this direction. And the reason I like to do a fake wind like this is because you maintain all of the details that you get from the turbulence and the sim, because essentially it's like you have your source that's moving through space, if you follow my mouse, and it's still, the smoke is still reacting in a good way in the DOP, and then you just move it all back to where it's supposed to be, and the smoke still has all the interesting shapes. Whereas if you use one of the wind forces inside the DOP, it tends to stretch those details or even override some of the turbulence in general. So if you look at that, we're getting a very exaggerated motion from the volume, but it's still maintaining all of that detail. So that's something similar what I'm going for here as in the X-Men reference I had up before. If you want to see that, it'll be in the opening video to this effect. And again, that extreme motion from the smoke, so nothing is stopping it, it's always going to move from here over there, is makes it feel just a lot more powerful. So something like that is what I'm after. So I just need to see, is this collision working? It does seem to be working fine. And then we can merge on our sparks as well. So maybe that wind is a bit too strong, or the turbulence is a little bit too much, so I'll probably tweak that down. But it's useful to do a much higher resolution sim before really deciding how much things need to change. Yeah, I think that makes it feel really powerful. As though the gunfire coming in is extremely strong, and it's just breaking against that shield and whipping over the edge. So I think my turbulence and maybe my input velocity is slightly over the top, and I could maybe rely more on that fake wind. So let me just try that quickly. And then we just need to set up a basic shader for the sparks and a basic volume shader for the smoke here, and do a light. So let's see, I wanted to just reduce this turbulence a bit. Have a little bit less velocity. Could maybe half this fake wind. So now that we've pretty much done the simulation part, I'll clean this up and write it out so we can start in the next one with just setting up the shaders and making sure that the sparks actually light up the character and the environment as well, because as the sparks are hitting the ground, we want little bright flashes of light. And even when they hit the shield, obviously we do have the shield emitting light on the character, but we'll just have a simple light setup for all of the sparks. And what's nice is we should get some good lighting inside of that smoke as well. So that'll be the next video. shaders and lights, render that all out, and then just pretty much jumping back into comp and bringing the whole shot together. So that feels a little bit more tame. I'll probably myself try some options between whether or not the input velocity feels better with less of the fake wind, or whether I need less velocity and more of the fake wind. At the moment I'm feeling like I needed a little bit less fake wind, but I shouldn't have dropped my velocity down on the source. I think the turbulence is probably fine, but I just need a little bit more velocity, and then we're good. So I'll see you guys in the next video.